My name is Claire Donovan, and at 29, I never thought I'd become the villain in my own family's story. When my grandmother Lucille passed away last month after a long, private battle with heart failure, I expected grief. I expected awkward silences at the funeral. What I didn't expect was to be cut out completely, like I'd never been part of the family at all. The first sign came through a mistake. My cousin Sabrina accidentally texted me instead of her brother. "We'll reading at 3 p.m. tomorrow. Don't let Claire find out. Mom said she'll ruin everything." The second message came seconds later. "Sorry, wrong person. Please ignore that." My hands shook as I stared at my phone. I was sitting on the floor of my small apartment in Portland, a stack of condolence cards unopened beside me. Ruin everything? What was there to ruin? I hadn't even thought about the will. All I wanted was to know what Grandma had left behind, what she wanted. Not just in the legal sense, in the emotional sense. She had been my second mother, my safe place, my anchor during every storm. I spent that night staring at the ceiling. Part of me wanted to take the high road, let them have their games and their inheritance. But another part of me, the one Grandma used to call the lion cub, whispered in my ear, "She'd want you there. She'd want you to fight for the truth." By morning, I knew what I had to do. I took the day off work, something I almost never did, and carefully chose a navy dress. Simple, classic, the same one Grandma once said made me look like the kind of woman who gets things done. The law office was in downtown Portland, in a quiet brick building near the waterfront. As the elevator doors opened, I saw them all immediately. Aunt Miranda in a stiff burgundy pantsuit, Uncle Davis checking his watch, Sabrina and Brent whispering in a corner, barely concealing their annoyance. Aunt Miranda spotted me first. Her smile faltered. "Claire," she said, loud enough to draw all eyes to me. "What are you doing here?" I lifted my chin. "I'm here for Grandma's will reading." "You weren't invited," Uncle Davis said, stepping forward. "This is for immediate family." "I am immediate family," I replied quietly. "Lucille Donovan was my grandmother." "You know what we mean?" Sabrina muttered under her breath. "People who actually cared." Before I could respond, the door behind them opened and an older man in a gray suit stepped out. He had kind eyes and a voice like worn leather. "Are we all here for the estate of Lucille Donovan?" he asked, then caught sight of me. "Ms. Claire Donovan?" "Yes," I said. "Perfect. Please come in. Your grandmother was very clear. You're the only one who must be present." And just like that, the room went still. Every face turned toward me, a wall of disbelief. I hadn't come looking for revenge, but I could already feel it. This was going to be war. To understand why the room went cold when the lawyer said my name, you'd have to know where I came from. I was the daughter of Grandma Lucille's youngest son, Thomas Donovan. Unlike his siblings who dove headfirst into the family's sprawling real estate empire, my father chose a quieter life. He became a literature professor at a small liberal arts college and married my mother, Elise, who owned a cozy, independent bookstore. Our house smelled of ink and cinnamon, and my childhood was filled with library trips, poetry readings, and bedtime stories about kindness and courage. We were the outliers. The Donovan family valued success measured in units sold, properties acquired, and Forbes rankings. We measured ours in thank you notes and dinner table conversations. Still, every Sunday without fail, Dad and I would visit Grandma Lucille. She lived in a charming historic home in the Northwest Hills of Portland, the kind with stained glass windows and a front porch wrapped in ivy. Even as a child, I could tell it was more than just a house. It was a time capsule. One filled with jazz music, antique clocks, and the warm scent of lavender and sugar cookies. Everything changed when I was 13. My father died suddenly from a brain aneurysm. One moment he was alive, quoting Whitman over breakfast. The next, he was gone. My mother tried her best to hold things together. But between mounting bills and her own grief, there were nights she would sit silently in the dark kitchen, hands wrapped around a cup of cold tea, staring through the steam. That's when Grandma stepped in. "She'll stay here half the week," Lucille announced to the family. "Elise needs support, and Claire needs a sense of normalcy. No arguments." And there weren't. No one dared argue with Lucille when she used that tone. For the next 6 years, I lived between two worlds. During the week, I helped my mother shelve books and ate boxed mac and cheese for dinner. On weekends, I sat in Lucille's sunroom reading Camus while she pruned roses and sipped Earl Grey. "You're like me," she'd say, watching me examine a pressed flower between the pages of her old gardening journal. "You see people for who they are, not what they can give you." I never realized until later how much those moments shaped me. Lucille wasn't the typical matriarch with pearls and prejudice. She wore faded jeans, cooked her own meals, and donated anonymously to organizations no one else in the family cared about. The house was her one indulgence. Not a trophy, but a refuge. And I was her shadow, her listener, her companion, the quiet one who watched while everyone else talked over her. It turns out, she was watching too. As I grew older, the invisible line between me and the rest of the Donovan clan became harder to ignore. My cousins, Brent, Sabrina, and Leona, were polished products of prep schools, Ivy League degrees, and trust funds. They interned at their parents' firms by 16, were handed company titles by 22, and treated life like a networking event. By contrast, I attended a state university and earned my degree in social work. I started working in hospice care, guiding families through the darkest chapters of their lives. To them, that made me a disappointment. Or worse, a waste. At a family Thanksgiving when I was 24, Uncle Davis raised his glass and said, "To the next generation of Donovans carrying the torch." He nodded at Brent, who had just opened a tech startup with family money. Sabrina had just been featured in a glossy magazine as a rising star in luxury real estate. Leona had married a hedge fund manager. No one mentioned me. Then Brent leaned over, swirling his scotch, and asked, "So Claire, still working with the dying?" He smirked like it was a joke. I smiled. "Yes, still helping people transition with dignity. It's the most meaningful work I've ever done." He blinked, unamused. "Well, that's nice." My choice of career became a silent indictment. And yet, I didn't regret it. Because every week, I'd visit Grandma Lucille's house with groceries and stories from my hospice center. Sometimes we'd bake her famous lemon poppy seed muffins together, just like we did when I was little. Other times, we'd sit in the backyard under her old pear tree and talk about life, about fear, about what it means to show up for people even when it's hard. Once, I arrived with flour on my sleeve, and she laughed. "You're your father's daughter, all right. Always carrying the mess of others with pride." She gave me a faded locket one afternoon, unceremoniously. Inside was a tiny photograph of her parents, yellowed with age and a few pressed forget-me-nots. "It's not worth anything to the others," she said softly. "But I think you'll understand why it matters." I nodded, not realizing at the time that the locket was more than a gift. It was a key. Behind closed doors, the rest of the family didn't hide their disdain anymore. "She's grooming Claire," I overheard Aunt Miranda tell a guest during a summer barbecue. "Setting her up for some kind of guilt-driven inheritance." I wanted to believe it was just paranoia, that Grandma's love couldn't possibly be something people would fight over. But deep down, I already knew. The storm was coming, and no amount of good intentions would stop it. It was a crisp Saturday morning in early spring when I got the call. "We're having a family meeting at Grandma's house this afternoon," Brent said flatly. "Uncle Davis wants everyone there." No mention of what it was about. No, please. Just expectation. I showed up anyway. Lucille's house smelled of pine cleaner and fresh scones, a scent that always meant she had company. But as I stepped inside, something felt off. The living room had been rearranged. There were unfamiliar documents on the coffee table, and sitting on the armchair next to Uncle Davis was a woman I didn't recognize, dressed in a crisp blazer and holding a folder labeled Wyndham Real Estate Group. My heart dropped. Lucille sat quietly in her favorite rocking chair, a crocheted shawl across her shoulders. She looked tired but composed. Her hands were folded neatly in her lap, her lips pursed. "What's going on?" I asked cautiously. Uncle Davis stood up, spreading his arms like a politician delivering good news. "We've been discussing a practical solution. It's time to sell the lake house." My breath caught. "You mean the cottage in Coeur d'Alene? The one Grandma's had since she was a teenager?" He nodded. "Exactly. It's barely used, costs a fortune to maintain, and with her health, well, It's just not realistic anymore. Miranda and I have already spoken to a broker. She thinks we could get close to $1 million for it. Lucille said nothing. I turned to her. Grandma? Is this what you want? Her eyes flicked toward mine. There was a hesitation, barely a second, but enough. I told them I'd think about it, she said finally. But I haven't made any decisions. She doesn't want to burden anyone. Miranda jumped in quickly. And it's not like anyone's using it. The last time we were there was… 6 years ago? I was there last summer, I said. With Grandma. We picked wild blueberries and watched hummingbirds from the porch swing. The room went silent. The realtor stood awkwardly. Perhaps I should give you a moment. Once she left, Uncle Davis's tone shifted. You always do this, Claire. Undermine what's best for the family. Just because you visit more often doesn't mean you know what's best for Mom. What I know, I said evenly, is that Grandma should be the one making decisions about her property, not you. That was the moment everything shifted. Later that evening, as I helped Lucille clean up in the kitchen, she gripped my wrist gently. I'm sorry they blindsided you, she said softly. They think they're protecting me, but really, they're protecting their own interests. I know, I said, but you don't have to explain yourself to me. She looked at me then. Really looked at me. That's exactly why I trust you. What I didn't know was that after that day, the family began to turn against me with purpose, whispering, plotting, watching. And what started as a disagreement over a lake house would soon become a full-blown war over everything Lucille had ever owned, including me. Grandma passed away on a rainy Tuesday in March. I didn't hear it from the family. It was Lucia, her longtime housekeeper and part-time caregiver, who called me in tears. Claire, I'm so sorry. She went peacefully this morning. She asked for you last night. I froze in place, the walls of the hospice center spinning around me. I'd just gotten off a night shift, still wearing scrubs, still carrying my lunchbox. And yet everything in my world had suddenly collapsed. I rushed to her house. By the time I arrived, the front door was already open. Inside, I found Aunt Miranda and Uncle Davis in the living room, calmly talking to a funeral director. Oh, Miranda said with her patented plastic smile. Claire, we were going to call you, of course. Of course. I wasn't asked to help with the arrangements. I wasn't consulted on the burial site, the service, or the eulogy. I was told the details in a group email with the rest of the extended family. At the funeral, I was seated in the third row, behind cousins I hadn't spoken to in years. No one acknowledged me. No one even looked at me. The service was formal, distant, just like the Donovans liked it. Uncle Davis delivered a speech that mentioned Grandma's legacy, her business acumen, her loyalty to family tradition. He didn't mention her garden, her love of Rachmaninoff, her habit of collecting antique bookmarks, or how she once held my hand for 2 hours straight after my father's funeral because I couldn't stop crying. Afterward, I stood alone beside her casket, whispering goodbye through tears. You mattered more than they ever saw. I'll never forget that. 2 weeks later, I got the text, a message from Sabrina. We'll reading at Beckett and Lowry tomorrow, 3 p.m. Don't tell Claire. She doesn't need to be there. Seconds later, another. Oops, wrong thread. I stared at the screen, numb. I hadn't even thought about Grandma's estate. It didn't feel real. But something about that message, the secrecy, the certainty that I wouldn't come, lit a fire in my chest. They were planning to erase me, to shut the door quietly and pretend I'd never mattered. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat on my bed rereading the last card Grandma ever gave me. She'd written, "The world will always try to tell you where you don't belong. Don't believe it. You belong anywhere your love has lived." The next morning, I took a deep breath, put on the navy blue dress she loved, and walked into that law office with my head high. They had no idea what was about to hit them. The elevator dinged softly as the doors opened on the top floor of Beckett and Lowry, and there they were, lined up like a panel of judges. Aunt Miranda, in her stiff cream suit and pearls. Uncle Davis, already a pacing. Sabrina and Brent huddled by the window whispering. Even Leona, who hadn't seen Grandma in 2 years, was somehow present. I stepped forward and their conversation stopped mid-breath. Aunt Miranda turned, her smile immediate and fake. "Claire," she said, her voice tight. "What are you doing here?" "I came for the will reading," I said calmly, trying to steady my heartbeat. "Lucille Donovan was my grandmother." Uncle Davis took a step forward as if to block me. "You weren't invited." "She has no legal standing here," Sabrina chimed in. "She wasn't even close to Grandma in her final years." I stared at her. "Is that the story you're telling yourselves?" Before anyone could fire back, the door to the conference room opened. An older man stepped out, in a crisp charcoal suit, glasses perched low on his nose. His voice was firm but warm. "Good afternoon. I'm Mr. Beckett. Are we all here for the estate of Lucille Donovan?" He looked at the group, then spotted me. "Miss Claire Donovan?" "Yes," I replied, my voice steady. "Wonderful. Please come in. Your grandmother was very clear. This meeting could not begin without you." The temperature in the waiting area dropped about 10 degrees. Inside, the room was elegant and cold. A long table stretched across the space, neatly arranged folders stacked at each chair. Everyone sat stiffly. I took a seat near the end, separated from the rest. Mr. Beckett stood at the head of the table and adjusted his glasses. "Before we begin, let me say this. Lucille Donovan was not only my client for over 30 years, but a dear friend. Her final wishes were expressed with exceptional clarity and forethought." He opened a thick folder. Aunt Miranda interrupted almost immediately. "We've already discussed the distribution of many items as a family. Claire doesn't need to be involved." "With respect," Mr. Beckett said, not looking up, "that is not how this process works. Nothing should have been distributed. And more importantly, Lucille left a new will, one that supersedes all previous documents." Uncle Davis shifted. "And what does that mean?" "It means," Mr. Beckett said slowly, "that Lucille Donovan left her entire estate to one person. Her home, the lake house, all financial assets, personal possessions. Everything." He paused, looked directly at me. "To Claire Donovan." The room erupted. "You're joking," Brent said, shooting to his feet. "She was manipulated," Aunt Miranda barked. "She was in no state to make that kind of decision." Mr. Beckett raised a single hand. "Your mother underwent 3 mental competency evaluations in her final months. All confirmed her full capacity. She anticipated this reaction." He reached for a small remote and pressed play on a monitor. Lucille's face appeared, clear and sharp, seated in her sunroom. "If you're watching this," she said softly, "then the vultures are circling. Let me tell you why I did what I did." And suddenly, no one had a word to say. The days after the will reading were chaos. My phone rang nonstop. Blocked numbers, angry voicemails, texts demanding explanations. Uncle Davis's voice thundered over one message. "This isn't over, Claire. You think you can steal what belongs to this family?" Another from Sabrina. "I hope you're proud. Grandma was obviously confused. You'll regret this." I stopped answering altogether. I shut off my phone, changed the locks on my apartment. But the noise kept coming, from coworkers who'd gotten calls from Aunt Miranda accusing me of manipulating a dying woman, from former classmates messaging me on social media, curious about the sudden inheritance. The worst moment came when my supervisor at the hospice center called me into her office. "Claire," she said gently, "we're hearing rumors that you're being investigated for elder exploitation. It's clearly malicious, but it's affecting how families perceive us." I stared at her, stunned. "You know I would never—" "I know," she said quickly, "but maybe it'd take some time. Personal leave." So I did, and the first place I went was Lucille's house. My house now. It was quiet, the kind of silence that feels heavy. The furniture sat stiffly, like it was waiting for someone else to arrive. But something felt off. I moved from room to room, noticing things missing. The antique clock in the hallway, Gone. The teacup collection Grandma loved? Half missing. The jewelry box nearly empty. Even the worn blue afghan her mother had knitted, the one always draped over her armchair, was nowhere to be found. They had taken it all. I collapsed into her chair, fury bubbling in my chest. It wasn't about money. It was about memory, about erasing her, piece by piece. That night, I opened every drawer, every cabinet, and then, behind a row of gardening books in her office, I found it. A false panel. A hidden compartment. Inside was a leather-bound journal, a handful of USB drives, and a sealed envelope labeled, Claire. Use if necessary. My fingers trembled as I opened the journal. Inside were years of notes. Lucille had recorded everything. Visits, conversations, gifts taken without permission. One entry read, Sabrina wore my diamond pin to that charity gala. I never gave it to her. Took a photo from the live stream, noted. Another, Davis pressured me again to sell the lake house. I said no. He called me irrational. I recorded the conversation. I plugged one of the USB drives into my laptop. Dozens of audio files appeared. One was labeled simply, Final Backup, Lake House Meeting. I clicked play. There was Davis's voice, clear as day. If Claire keeps poking around, we'll find a way to lock her out completely. She's not one of us. Grandma's voice followed, calm and deliberate. She's the only one who still listens. I stared at the screen, tears forming. She had known, she had been preparing. And now it was my turn. I picked up the phone and called Mr. Beckett. It's time, I said. Let's fight back. 1 week later, I walked into the law office again. But this time I wasn't alone. Sitting beside me was Vanessa Kim, a sharp, no-nonsense estate litigation attorney Mr. Beckett had referred. She reviewed every document Lucille had left, her journals, the USBs, the voice recordings, and declared, Claire, this isn't a defense, this is an airtight case. Your grandmother built a legal fortress. Vanessa drafted formal inventory reports for all the missing items and filed them with the probate court. Cease and desist letters were sent to every relative who had removed property. We filed a motion to dismiss the will contest lawsuit Uncle Davis had initiated, attaching Lucille's video testimony and medical evaluations as exhibits. Then we called for a final meeting with everyone. They showed up, stiff and defensive. Uncle Davis brought a lawyer. Aunt Miranda refused to look at me. Brent and Leona stared daggers, while Sabrina rolled her eyes every time Vanessa spoke. But they weren't prepared for what came next. Vanessa turned on the screen, and Lucille appeared once more, this time seated in her sunroom with Mr. Beckett by her side. If they try to challenge this will, Lucille said, voice clear and unwavering, play this video, and then show them the next folder. Vanessa flipped to a spreadsheet titled Unauthorized Removals, documented and photographed. Tiffany lamp, taken by Aunt Miranda. Diamond tennis bracelet, seen on Sabrina at charity gala. Oil painting from Lake House, displayed in Davis's office. Total estimated value, $376,500. Vanessa didn't even flinch as she delivered the next line. We are prepared to pursue criminal theft charges if all items are not returned within 10 business days. The silence was deafening. Then Uncle Davis leaned forward, clearing his throat. Perhaps we've acted out of grief. Emotions were high. Maybe we can come to an agreement. We already have, I said quietly. It was written by a woman none of you truly knew. Over the next week, items began to arrive, quietly. Through couriers, no notes, no apologies. But they came. And still, I wasn't looking for revenge. I made individual calls to each family member, offering them the chance to choose one item. Something sentimental. Nothing of high monetary value, just a piece of grandma that meant something. Some accepted, some declined. But it didn't matter. Because I knew now this legacy wasn't about jewelry or real estate. It was about dignity, about truth, about holding your ground when no one else will. 6 months later, I founded the Lucille Donovan Fund, offering housing support and end-of-life resources for seniors with no one left to care for them. As I stood in Grandma's garden that fall evening, watching the wind move gently through the pear trees, I whispered, "We did it. And for the first time in months, I felt peace. Lucille's legacy had been protected, and mine had just begun.